Hi, today I'm going to have an in-depth look at the Roland D-50. I'm going to go over all of its sound editing parameters, but first I want to talk a little bit about what the synthesizer actually is. The D-50 offers an interesting combination of sample-based sounds and digital subtractive synthesis. And I think for designing your own sounds on the D-50, it's crucial to understand the basic architecture of its synth engine. So that's where I'm going to start. Each patch of the D-50 consists of 2 tones, making it bitimbral. Each tone then again consists of 2 partials, which can either be synthesized sounds or samples. The balance of these 4 partials I think is a good place to start if you want to customize your sounds on the D-50. So I loaded up a random patch here, Wabi Sabi, on the D-50, and then on the upper left hand side we've got this joystick, which when I press the button for partial balance lets me adjust the balance of the 2 tones and of the 2 partials within a tone. Here's another preset. By pressing this lower button next to the joystick, I can adjust the partial balance of the lower tone by moving the joystick from left to right. By moving it up and down, I'm adjusting the balance of upper and lower tone. You can hear that this can drastically change the sound and get you someplace completely different. Here's another example with a sound that I already messed around with a little bit, added a bunch of reverb and changed some parameters. So if that's not enough control for you, that's exactly what you can do. You can dive into the menu and then change almost anything you would like. But before we get to that, I want to have a quick look at the physical instrument itself and user interface. So let's start maybe with the back side of the instrument. Here we've got MIDI in, out and through, and then there's some control inputs, a pedal switch which lets you switch patches with a pedal hold, an external control, and expression pedal input where you can plug in expression pedals. Then there's a stereo phone output and a main stereo 1/4" jack output. Then on the top side of the instrument there's a memory card slot. The memory card offers memory for 64 patches, but you don't necessarily have to have one because there's also an internal memory. The D-50 can store 64 patches internally, divided into 8 banks of 8 patches. These first 8 numbered buttons on the left side let you select the bank, and then the 8 numbered buttons on the right side let you select the patch. The first 4 buttons on the left side here double as partial selectors. Once you're in a partial edit menu, I'll talk about that more in a bit. And the first 4 buttons on the right side double as partial mutes. The joystick on the top left is mainly for adjusting values within the menu. The red light to the right of this value button shows you that this is what it is doing right now. If it's set to local down here, this lets you adjust 2 parameters at once. And with the 2 top buttons here engaged, you can either adjust the partial balance of the upper or lower tone. On the very left here, we have a main volume control and then a main aftertouch control, a key transpose button, which lets you transpose the keyboard. Right now it's set to -12. By pressing the increment button here, I can step by step set this back to, let's say, 0 again. This chase button turns the chase effect on and off, which is kind of a delay thing. The portamento button turns the portamento on and off, and there's a pitch wheel, which when pushed upwards introduces some vibrato to the sound. And then we've got the LCD display here, which is where most of the sound editing is done, and a number of buttons below the screen which can be used to select things above the buttons on the screen. If a menu has multiple pages, we can use the arrow buttons to the very right or left to navigate between them. And then on the right side here, a number of controls to edit and navigate the menu. There's a numpad, and then the two red buttons, data transfer and write, are for saving things, and increment and decrement to adjust values, and a compare, copy, undo, and exit button. So I've created this kind of init patch, which is just a square wave, so we can have a look at how we can shape the sound from scratch using the menu. The first menu point is called tone detune, and it gives us some tuning options for the lower tone in semitones, which is set to +12 right now, and for the upper tone in semitones as well. And then there's some fine-tune options for both the upper and lower tone as well. You can see here that when I press a button below a value, the upper key here, for example, the value starts blinking, and I can edit it now, for example, by using the joystick here. The next three menu buttons, the key mode, split mode, and tone balance, are directly represented on the screen of the main menu as well. So these values above the buttons show you what they're set to right now, and by pressing a button, the value starts blinking. The key mode, for example, is set to hold right now, which means we can only hear the upper tone, and we get 16 polyphony. I can change this by pressing increment, so it's set to dual right now, and now we have a layered sound. Both the upper and lower tone are being played simultaneously, but we only get 8-note polyphony. By pressing tone balance, I can adjust the balance of the two tones, so this is just a saw, and this is just a square, and with the balance somewhere in the middle, we can hear both at the same time. With the key mode being set to split, the keyboard is going to be split, so the bottom half is going to be a saw up to this C4, and then from there on it's going to be a square. The split point lets you choose where the keyboard is going to be split, so if I move this up, for example, the square is going to start at E4. I'm going to set this back to hold for now because it makes it a bit easier to show things when we're only dealing with one tone at a time. So let's move on to these two buttons, which bring you to the menus to edit your lower and upper tone. And because I set the key mode to hold and we're only hearing the upper tone, I'm going to go to the upper tone edit menu. The brackets here tell us that we're dealing with the submenus, so by hitting one of the buttons below one of the submenu titles, I can get to the corresponding menu. So for example, the first one is for changing the name, which I'm not going to do here. And then the second one is called common, which means partial 1 and partial 2 have those parameters in common. Here we get to another page of submenus, the first one being structure. Here you can select what combination of sample-based or synthesized sounds you would like to use for your two partials. The options being 2 synthesized sounds, a sample sound and a synthesized sound, and 2 sample-based sounds, plus options with ring modulation for each of those combinations. So you look up the number you want on the top panel here. I have it set to 1 right now, which is just 2 synthesized sounds. The next menu is for the pitch envelope. Again, we have an illustration of the pitch envelope on the faceplate here, which makes it a bit easier to understand what the different parameters do. The L's here are levels and the T's are times. So on the first menu page, we get T1 to 4, which are the times it takes the envelope to get to the next stage. And on the second page, we have the levels, level 0, 1, 2, a sustained level and an end level. So for example, if I set this L0 level to something very low, the pitch is going to start below the key I'm pressing on the keyboard, and then it's going to go up to level 1, which is at 0 right now, which means it's the note I'm pressing on the keyboard. And then, as expected, by adjusting this time 1 parameter, I can adjust the time it takes the pitch to drift up to the note I'm pressing on the keyboard. I'll set this back to 0, and I'll move on to the third page of the pitch envelope, which has a LFO depth option, which will lead to vibrato. Another option for vibrato is this lever parameter, which sets the amount of vibrato this modulation lever adds to the sound. And then a depth parameter for the aftertouch vibrato. Pitch, by the way, is always and can only be modulated by LFO1, which already brings me to this next LFO menu. Here I can pick a waveform. The options are triangle, saw, square, and random. Adjust the rate, so for example, slow down or speed up the vibrato effect. And then there's a delay and a sync option for the LFOs. There are 3 LFOs, and I can navigate between their menus by using the right and left arrow buttons to the right and left of the screen. Next, there is a EQ menu, which brings us to the EQ. We get a low shelf with adjustable gain and an adjustable frequency. These are the first 2 parameters on the menu here, and then at a higher frequency we get a bell with adjustable frequency and adjustable Q, which is the width of the bell, and adjustable gain. The next point on the menu is the chorus. For the chorus we get to pick between a bunch of different types, dialing up the balance here so we can hear it. So I get 8 different types of choruses. And for each of them we can adjust the rate and the depth. So that's all for the common menu. And next up are the 2 menus for editing the 2 partials individually. They're both identical, so let's just look at partial 1 edit menu. The first menu is pitch. We've got here a chorus tuning option in semitones. I'll set this back to C4. And there's a fine tune parameter and a key follow parameter, which is key tracking. It's set to 1, which means 12 semitones are going to cover 1 octave. If I increase this, in this case 12 semitones will now go across 5/4 of an octave. Seldom desirable, but nice to know it's there. I'll set it back to 1 though. The next menu is called form, meaning waveform. Here we pick our waveform or a sample. And then on the second page of this menu we can adjust the pulse width. Got a LFO depth option here to let the LFO do the modulating for us, giving this nice PWM sound. By the way, this sounds a bit different here because I forgot about this menu page, so I had to do it later. So that's where the reverb and all this comes from. For the pulse width we also get a velocity and aftertouch option. Let's check out the aftertouch here maybe. This can go positive or negative. And then we have the option to choose which LFO we want to affect the pulse with. The plus here means it's in its regular phase. We also get options with a minus, which means the phase is going to be inverted. So let's move on to the next menu section. TVF stands for time variant filter. Here we get control over the cutoff frequency. You can hear I have to repress the key for the changes to have an effect, so no manual control over the filter. Then we get resonance. Same thing here. Key tracking, which is set to 1/2 an octave per 12 semitones here. And then there's a bias option for the key tracking, where we can set the bias point and the bias level. In this case, if I increase the bias level, the lower I play, the higher the cutoff frequency until I get to the bias point, and after that it's just going to stay the same. The bias level can also go negative, so it has the opposite effect. So here the filter gradually opens until I get to the bias point. So let's move on to the second page of the filter menu. Here we get a depth control for the envelope. Again, have a look at this on this illustration here. It's the same as the amp envelope. So of course, increasing the depth parameter leads to modulation of the filter cutoff frequency by the envelope. Then we've got a velocity option for the filter envelope depth, meaning the harder I hit a key, the more envelope modulation I get. And there's a depth key follow option, meaning the higher the note, the more filter envelope modulation. And then this last one I think is a pretty interesting one. This is a time key follow parameter, which adjusts the time the envelope takes depending on the note I play. So up here the envelope gets squeezed together, and down here it gets stretched out. And then on the next page, of course, we get control over the envelope times and the envelope levels, just like we did for the pitch envelope. For demonstration purposes, I'm setting the level 1 here all the way to 100. Next, I'm going to the time menu and adjusting T1 changes the time it takes the filter to first open all the way up. Here you can also easily hear that unlike a regular ADSR envelope, there are 2 wobbles before the sound settles on a sustain level. We can also have an LFO affect the cutoff frequency. We get to pick which one of the LFOs, its phase, and we can adjust the depth of the modulation. Here also we get a aftertouch option for the cutoff frequency. The main aftertouch slider on the left here also has an influence on how much modulation we get from the aftertouch here. This, however, affects all of the things assigned to aftertouch. So with the aftertouch amount within the menu, we have a good option to mix together the different things that aftertouch is affecting. So that's it for the filter menu. Let's move on to the amp. On the first page here, we have a simple level parameter, then the amount of velocity that goes to the volume, and then again we have a bias point and a bias level, which works the same as it did for the filter. And then on the next page, we get to the envelope times. So here, for example, by dialing up this last time T5, we get some release on the sound. Or for example, by dialing back the sustain level, the sound only goes up to the maximum during the first 3 stages and then gets really quiet. On the next menu page, we get control over how much the velocity should affect the envelope modulation of the amp. And then again, there's this nice time key follow parameter, which in this case makes the envelope shorter and shorter the higher up on the keyboard I go. Then lastly, if we want to start from scratch, we have the option to initialize a partial. So let's go back to the tone edit menu, where the last option is to copy a tone, which is kind of nice because it lets you mix and match tones from different patches. You just pick the patch number you want, and then on the right side you can see whether you're picking the upper or lower tone. So here I'm just going to reload what I had before, which is that square wave. I'm going to filter it again a little bit and add some filter envelope modulation. So now I think I'm ready to look at the last menu, which is the patch edit menu. Here we can name a patch, which again I'm not going to do. And then we have a control menu. Here I can set the amount of pitch bend for the pitch wheel and the amount of pitch bend for the aftertouch. And then we have some parameters affecting the portamento. We can choose whether it should affect the upper and lower tone, only the lower, or only. We get to decide the same thing for the hold, which is the sustain pedal, and of course we also get to adjust the portamento time. The next menu in the patch edit menu is the output menu. This is where the reverb is hidden, so that's an interesting thing. All I have to do to hear it is increase the balance. There are 4 different modes for the routing of the reverb. The first option is both upper and lower tone going into both inputs of the reverb, and then the reverb going back out both to upper and lower tone. The second option is upper and lower going into one of the inputs of the reverb each, and then the reverb going out to both. The third one is reverb only for the upper tone, and the last option is reverb only for the lower tone. We get 32 different types of reverb, even though some of them are more delays than reverbs. Let me find one maybe. I particularly like this last one called Space, which is just a super long over-the-top reverb. Next up is the chase function, which is kind of a delay. For this to work, I have to turn it on using the dedicated chase button on the left side here. This only works with the key mode set to whole or to dual, and then we get different modes for both of them, which we can dial in by using the mode control on the very left on the screen here, and then we can adjust the time and the level. I'm gonna change the key mode to dual now, so you can see that it behaves differently depending on the key mode. The mode you're hearing right now is upper, lower, upper, meaning we hear the upper tone, the lower tone, and the upper tone again. And lastly, there's a MIDI menu, which I do not want to go over right now. Just let me say that the D-50 offers quite extensive MIDI functionality, and you can do a lot of things with it. So that's all of the menu, but we haven't looked at samples yet. So to load a sample, I have to change the structure to something with a sample. So I'm going to go to structure, and I'm going to pick 3 here, which is going to give me a sample sound for partial 1 and a synthesized sound for partial 2. To change the sample, I have to go into the partial menu of partial 1 and then to the form. Here I can pick which of the samples on the D-50 I would like to use. There's a total of 100 samples. And some of them, like this one, are loops, more suited for sustained sounds. Others are just very short one-shot samples, more suited to add a particular attack to a sound. Here I'm settling for this kind of vocal loop, which I think blends nicely with the synthesized sound I'm using. Again, by hitting the upper or lower partial balance button, I can not only adjust the balance of the partials with the joystick, but also the balance of upper and lower tone. By moving the joystick up and down, I'm adjusting the tone balance, and by moving it left-right, I'm adjusting the partial balance. Right now, some of the partials are muted though. We can see this when we go into a partial edit menu. The ones and zeros next to the tone name tell us which of the partials are muted and which ones are active. By hitting the partial mute buttons, I can activate the remaining partials. Now this is a bit random, but now we can hear all the partials and we can mix them together using the partial balance control for the joystick. So we're more or less back where we started, mixing and blending partials and tones together, and I think that's a good place to end with, because it is, in my opinion, the most distinctive feature of this very nice synthesizer. So I hope you found this interesting or helpful. Let's maybe listen to a little bit more of that intro music I played for you in the beginning, and thanks a lot for watching. Bye bye.